Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
So I have on the line Rajiv Mohabir. He is a poet, author. How are you, Rajiv?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're ready to chat. Checking out your website right now. A very, very nice website. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? Then we'll get right into talking and chatting with you about poetry and stuff.
Sure. I grew up outside of Orlando in a place called Chuliota. My parents are from a South American country called Guyana, but we are ethnically Indian. My ancestors came over from India to the Caribbean in the late 1800s to work the sugar plantations. And I was born in London. We lived in New York for a bit, and then then our whole family moved to Orlando. I went to the University of Florida in Gainesville, so it's great to be back in Florida. I moved to New York, where I was a teacher in the public school system there. I taught ESL for about 8 years, and right now I live in Honolulu, and I'm a grad student in the PhD program in English, and I teach composition and creative writing.
All right, great. So my first question would be just kind of going into how you started. Like, what was like a big thing that's inspired you to push forward and to make your writings and your poems?
That's a really good question. I feel as though I have always been secreting away my ideas, like ferreting them away into like lines of poetry. I think a big part of it had to be the fact that as like middle school-ish age, when I became aware of my queerness, it was one way to kind of externalize my story without giving too much away, meaning I was able to create metaphor, really play with metaphor, stretch these things so that it would become real in a different way and appear on the page as a way of externalizing this thing. And and it's something that I had done from the time I was like 8, although I never really thought of it as poetry, despite reading Gwendolyn Brooks and being really influenced by Langston Hughes early on, from middle school into high school, where I discovered poets like Joy Harjo and Gwendolyn Brooks, who really kind of shaped my idea of what poetry should be or should look like. But it wasn't until I was later in life, it was after I was already a public school teacher, that I decided that I would turn up the volume. I remember I had this really transformative weekend in Baltimore with a very dear friend of mine who is a poet, and sitting there talking with him and his poetry friends, I realized, oh yeah, this is something that I do, but I've been very secret about it. So I think I was 28 when I started to turn up the volume. And to really start to think of myself as doing poetry all along.
Great, thank you for sharing.
What do you find is the most challenging thing about writing poetry? Do you, find that it's getting in the right context? Is it challenging just to put it all together? What's your biggest obstacle, you'd say?
And as far as writing poetry goes, I think my biggest obstacle is clarity. I feel as though I'm trying to undo the secrets that I'm trying to put into the line. I feel as though the most moving poetry that I'm able to read and connect with is the poetry that's the most clear, that uses simple language to express nuance, and that's something that I struggle with. It's either through overwriting or revision to the point that it no longer resembles anything that's clear. I've stripped it completely of all of its feathers. Kind of metaphor is what I see as a challenge for me. And then also thinking about audience too. I'm often curious as to whether or not I should compose something for my own kind of aesthetic appeal, like my author as audience versus my publisher as the audience that I'm writing for. So that's also another challenge, how to strike that balance.
What would you offer young poets, advice you'd offer young poets about how to become, to be published and to get your work out there?
I would say that, first of all, poetry is totally worth your time, It's totally worth all of the effort that it takes and all of the heartbreak along the way. I would say that tenacity is the mark of a good poet. Somebody who, if you can keep on writing, the most successful people that I know in the poetry world have been writers for a really long time, and they've not let it die, based on feedback from journals, editors, etc. Think of it for every 1,000 submissions that you will make early on in your writing careers, 999 of them will be rejections. It doesn't mean anything about you as a person. It doesn't mean anything about your writing. That's just the way that it goes.
All right. So I'm not professional in any sense of the word for writing, but I always look into trying out new things, trying out new different aspects. And I don't do poetry, but I do longer writings. And I'm just curious on, like, when you're doing a longer writing and you're using metaphors, what is too much, or is there such thing as too much?
Oh, that's so funny. I'm struggling with personal essay, creative nonfiction, this kind of thing. And I think about the role of metaphor in these different genres. I am not on the side of the argument that would say to cut back the metaphor. And as far as like extending a metaphor, I think that it could be something that adds nuance and vibrancy to whatever piece of prose that it is. Like,
well, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking. That's why I was wondering, because, like, in my opinion, when you use metaphors, it brings a sense of it's like taking a visual painting and putting it into words, for a momentary second, and then if you have a longer writing and you have a whole bunch of different metaphors in there, it's like taking a gallery of art and placing it into a giant written, like essay or book or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea.
Do you have any work planned for the future? Like any books of poetry, short stories, anything coming up?
Oh, yeah, actually. So my first book just came out in March of this year, and it was with the Four-Way Books. My second book is coming out in May of 2017 with Tupelo Press, and I am super excited about it. I'm going over the galley proofs now. I've already started to line edit and selecting my cover at the moment. It's really, really exciting.
All right. Well, fantastic. Where's the best place we can find information on you, purchase your books, and learn more about you? Where can we go?
You can go to my website at www.rajivmohabir.com, and that's RAJIVMOHABIR.com.
All right, Rajiv, thanks for calling. Enjoy the rest of the book fair, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care. All right, bye-bye. You're listening to Author's Corner, powered by Life Improvement Radio, live from the Mind Book Fair, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.